This video will cover the Starcom base station elevator, specifically the gearbox and modifications I did to it to be able to keep it on the elevator platform. Also with the functions of the Magna-Lock gimmick which came with the vehicle, and also keeping it with the tradition of it running on its own with no battery power. The modifications were extensive, at least to the gearbox, that is, and that's the only thing that was modified. Hopefully you'll like the video, and I will explain as much as I can in detail as to what I did and how I came upon doing it. So for today's modifications, the following tools: a Phillips screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, some snips, a hammer, a pair of pliers, and a cutting tool, preferably an X-Acto knife, but since I didn't bring it with me, my multi-tool will have to cover the parts of the X-Acto knife and pliers. Now, I've already refitted a gearbox already for my base station, and I've already completed the modifications, and it works fine. I'm using my test dummy here to activate the Magna-Lock feature on this particular toy. Now, pay close attention to where I'm pointing. That is what enables the Magna-Lock feature. It is the stop-start clog on the gearbox. Let's take it apart and look at it in more detail. After removing all the screws, simply remove the cover, and there it all is. To remove the elevator, simply twist and pull out, and there it is. While you're at it, you can inspect the railing system and make sure all the little teeth on the edge of the rail are intact and they aren't damaged. Since this particular toy is notorious for getting busted, kids often really are brutal when they lower the elevator back down to reset it. Now, the modifications I did, you can clearly see if you've ever taken this toy apart yourself. I've reproportioned several things, but it still remains the same in many aspects, like that clog, the start-stop feature for the Magnalock gimmick, which made the toy so popular in the first place. Now, I've reproportioned this gear and I'm now using it as a spacer. Whoop, there it went. There's that orange gear that's been modified, and you can see I've also modified the S-spring gear on the main axle. These are new parts, and they employ a different type of system in order for them to work. They're from the new gearboxes I bought a while back. Now let's take a look at this other gearbox. It seems to want to work, but since the S-spring gears are slipping, it can't gather any tension. So we're just going to have to take it out of there and start the process of redoing this gearbox. Now what you need is a flathead screwdriver. And there are 3 tabs that you have to open up so you can remove the gearbox. I would use my tweezers, but I can't find them, so I gotta do it the hard way. Now, let's take a closer look at this gearbox, and if you can notice, there's an S-spring on the outside of the gearbox. That's to keep that orange gear, it's able to rotate freely one way and then lock to wind the mechanism when it rotates the other way. I think this is a way to be able to adjust the tension on the elevator system when you're playing with the toy, just in case, you know, for some reason the gearbox loses tension and it's unable to reach the top of the platform. when you're playing with it. Also, on the reverse side of the gearbox is that little start-stop clog that I'm going to remove. And don't lose this piece. This piece is very important unless you want to make one from scratch. But that piece is what activates that Magnalock feature on the toy. So put it somewhere safe so you don't lose it. So as always, when you open these little gearboxes, you might want to straighten out your spring, and the inside end you might want to straighten it out. But I'm taking a look at this spring, and I'm feeling that it's kind of weak, so I'm probably going to replace it with a new spring. Putting some of the housing aside, I'm going to take a look at the inside and the gears. Now, what I have here in my hand now is gear 1. And now notice that gear 1 has a long axle. That's also a very important part. And I should say that if this gear is mangled or missing teeth in any way, then you might as well just swap out the whole gearbox with a new one, and you wouldn't be able to use the Magnalock feature, but at least you would have a working elevator with a new motor. Now I'm looking on the inside, and that S gear, it seems like the S spring gear on the inside is grabbing, but the one on the outside does not. And that was kind of a brain teaser for the last one. The last one had mangled gears, and not to mention the S spring gears weren't working at all. But this seems to be a gearbox that was a little bit better taken care of. It's just the plastic broke down, and those S spring gears aren't working anymore. So there they are. There's the orange gear, the outside S spring. Now I'm going to remove the inside S spring, and there's that main gear. Now I'll reappropriate the main gear later on for this build and use it as a spacer for the modifications I'm going to do to the gearbox. Put out my glasses and my little tool for repairing glasses, which is great for looking at the teeth on these little gears, because without it I'm basically flying blind. So I'm going to take the time and look at every gear. I believe that's gear 2. I think that's gear 3. And gear 1 we already looked at, but there's that C gear. And yeah, I can't see any hairline fractures of the S-spring gears, and that main gear looks good too, but we're going to use it for something else, so we're not going to worry about that right now. Now let's pull out the bag of gearboxes. And remember, I bought these off of Amazon. You get an assortment. So the ones we're going to be rebuilding the gearbox with are the Toys That Hop. Now, the Toys That Hop have a special gearbox of their own. And I'm just going to select 2 of those because I'll be needing 2 of those gearboxes to be able to fix one of the Starcom elevator platforms. So there's one, and there's the second one. Oh, look at that. My tweezers are right there. I'll be darned. Okay. So, oh, and I have a... There's a new S gear that comes out of these new gearboxes, and I'll be able to show you a little bit more detail about that later. So I'll put that off to the side and put away everything else. So these little gearboxes, they do fit inside. The new ones do fit inside, but for the clog, they're offset just a tiny bit. So you can't take that gear 1, and put it into these new gearboxes because it would be offset from the hole that's already made into the platform. So it's best just to use the old housing and rebuild it. So we're going to start off by disassembling this new gearbox and getting the pieces we need. Okay, so let's put these parts side by side so I can better explain to you what I discovered. Now, the new gearbox employs a different system from the original. The new one has like a ratcheting S spring system, where the original has like a clutch. It's like a clutch on a car, a flywheel and clutch ratcheting system or winding system that tends to fail. Now you can see from the new S-spring ratcheting system that comes from the new box It's a little bit more robust, the plastic, and it seems a lot more firmer when you turn it. Very nice. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that the specs are pretty much the same, and you can swap it with the original gears on any gearbox that's the same size. I'll show you. Okay, now that I've removed the parts I need, um, I needed to figure out how I was going to flip the S-spring on these new axles. So I needed some sort of form of reference, so I went ahead and I put together the old axle with all its gears, just to give me an idea of how it's supposed to work. So I needed to flip these new S-spring gears, at least one on one of the axles, so they both face the same way. And I thought about it and I thought about it, and I couldn't remove it with my fingers because I could feel the springs on each end bending, and I was afraid of breaking it. So since I had plenty of samples to play with, I started thinking of an alternative way. what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the main gear fits inside and it interacts with gear 2. I'm going to see how it interacts, if all the teeth mesh together. And it seems like it's doing fine. Very nice fit. So what I'm thinking now is I need a better reference as to what I'm doing, because I can't see what the end product is, and luckily I have 2 of these motors that are here available to me. I guess the best way to have done this is, before I even started the modification, is to take a picture of the motor, the way it looks, the way it's assembled, before I took it apart. But since I skipped that part, I'm just going to go ahead and take out the modified motor, so I have a good reference and direction as to how to assemble the motor later. Okay, so now that I have a good form of reference, I can see now that if I assemble the main axle the way it is, it's going to be facing the wrong way. So I need to be able to turn the rod the other way. So I really need to think about how I'm going to flip that S-spring on that main axle. So after thinking for a while, I just decided to take a hammer to it, in the hopes of maybe being able to push out that axle and releasing that S-spring gear. I didn't know how it was put together, whether it was glued on or if it's pressure fitted. I didn't know, so I just took a risk and I decided to hammer it out. So since this is the part of this S-spring is going to be inside the gearbox, so I can't hammer on the side of where those ears or lips are. So I got to take the flat end of it and hammer it and place it against the snips, and it came out. It came out. I was so relieved to see that the first time I did this. So then I'll just flip it and then hammer it back in. If I can just get it back on there. I'm Mr. Butterfingers today. So I'll put that S-spring backwards. And just to give you some reference, the green one is backwards, and the blue one is the way it comes out from the motor. So I'm going to flip it and then hammer it back in place. Now, mind you, I didn't really use a lot of force to hammer it. I just kind of tapped it back in. And I was just lucky that this worked out the way it did. So now that it's hammered back in, I can see that it's firm, and I can turn it, and I can use that ratchet feature. I can feel it pulling and pushing against my fingers, so it was a good fit. Well done. Now all I need to do now is place it in the housing where it's going to be held and see if there's enough of that axle to protrude out the back of it. So I'm going to put that housing divider, and then the rest of the housing, that's the spring cover. And it's just fine. It's flush. Great. Super. So now we can begin assembly of this gearbox. Now, this gearbox was kind of nice to work on because since the rod is inverted to the other side of the gearbox, I have something to hold on to. And I was able to put in all the gears without any trouble. So that's gear one, and I'm going to put it in. And it's got a very long axle to it. So when you're putting on that housing divider, for this particular instance, that gear axle should be the first thing that goes into the housing divider as you're putting it on. So when you're going to put on the housing divider, just make sure that's the first thing you see, and that's the gear that guides you in to assemble that divider, or else you're going to have a lot of trouble putting it together. All right. Now we've installed the spring and the motor's running. Looks like it can run on its own power. And we're going to go ahead and make sure everything's okay and then compare it to our form of reference, which is the other motor that was modified. And it's looking good. You can see the metal from the spring on the same side of each gearbox, which means I was successful in pointing the axle in the right direction it's supposed to be in, because this clog here that I'm installing is the start-stop feature for the gearbox, and that's activated when the Magnelock feature is enabled on the toy. So I'm going to go ahead and give it another wind up and see how that clog interacts with the motor now that I've installed it. I have a feeling, like the last time I pushed it in too much and it kind of hindered the motor from turning. If I can just stop from being Mr. Butterfingers today. It's working, but it seems to hinder a little bit, so I might have to remove it and then reinstall it again. Okay, well that seems good enough. Okay, so now we have that, and now I need to get this other S-spring out of the axle, and I need this to be the external S-spring for the wind-up tension feature, or calibration, if you will, of the elevator railing system. So I need to remove that S-spring from this axle and then install it onto the axle for the motor. So I'm going to hammer that out, and it's good. Okay. Now I need to remove those little ears or tongues, or those little protrusions from the S-spring to make it flush. That way it'll lie flat against the housing on the outside of the gearbox. Now, normally for this, I'd use my needle nose pliers and an X-Acto knife, and I would be able to just cut them right off. But since I don't have my X-Acto knife with me, I'm going to have to um, use either the pliers, the needle nose pliers, kind of bend them off, or make a cut with the knife in the tools there with the that little toolkit there, my Gerber multi-tool. Let's see how that goes. Okay, now that I've flattened out that S-spring, I'm going to go ahead and use the file tool on my multi-tool there and go ahead and scratch a little bit of that axle closest to the housing. I'm going to go ahead and scratch all around, get some good grooves in there. That way when I put that glue on there, that S-spring will bind to it and it won't come off. Now this glue that I'm using, it hardens really quick. So what I like to do is when I put on this S-spring, I kind of twist it on there slowly, just using a light touch, and when it starts to bond, that's when I snap it in uh, towards the housing, and that's it. It's on there. Okay, now we're going to prep uh, the large orange gear so we can put it together with um, the main gear for the outside S spring. So on the first gearbox that I did, this orange gear somehow melted itself to the outside pinning thing. It's that little piece of metal that they put on the outside of the axle to hold it in place. It's some sort of a pin, and somehow it kind of melted itself to it. So when I pulled it out, it was kind of cockeyed. So it was never going to work in the first place. So I thought to myself, well, what can I do? So I thought I would glue uh, the main gear for that outside S spring to that orange gear, and that way, it'll just be bonded to it, and that's it. And it'll still move loose the way it was intended to move. So it's essentially the same thing. Okay, so I'm just finalizing here the fit and taking off some excess material or some excess material. Can't talk today for some reason. Okay, so now I'm gonna glue that main gear onto the large orange gear, and I'm gonna put a good amount of glue around the hole. Just don't get anything on the center, and that should be good. And then it doesn't really matter if you get glue on the outside of the gear, just don't get anything on the inside. So that looks good, and we'll leave that to set. So here we are with the final product. The refit went nice, and I'm testing it out. So this is the first gearbox I rebuilt, and I'm using the original gear from the gearbox as a spacer. And the reason I did that is because on the original gearbox, before I cut that little tie down or whatever it is, it didn't have it didn't need anything to hold it in place. So by using this spacer, I'm actually using the rail on the inside back of the railing system to put tension, just a little bit of tension, not a lot, just a little bit of tension on that orange gear. That way it keeps it in place and it doesn't wobble while it's traveling up and down the railing system. And just not to forget to snip that extra axle. Not too much, just leave enough so you can put the spacer. And then that should be it. We'll now begin to test the gearboxes in the elevator platforms. Next step is to test and calibrate. Now to reassemble the platform is quite easy. All you do is push it into the groove and then turn, and it's back inside. Now I'm not going to screw down the backs of these elevators because I'm going to calibrate. Well, I calibrated one, I just have to calibrate the other. And if I overwind the motor, then all I have to do is simply remove the backing to the elevator and it'll unwind itself. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going to see how far up it'll travel and then firmly push up so it will skip and then wind itself a little bit more and repeat again. Finally, I'll end up with a sufficient tension to reach the top of the elevator without any problems. Okay, now I've reached the top of the elevator, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to test the start-stop feature, and I'm going to wind both of them up, and there they are, they're holding. Nice. Now to activate and watch them go. Well, all right. This has been another successful repair, and hopefully I can bring more of these videos to you as I gradually fix my inventory of Starcom toys. Please remember to like and subscribe, and hope to see you all on the next video. Thanks.